Wave.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to The Right Time, a Wave original. My name is Bomani Jones. Thanks for listening wherever you get your podcast. Thanks for watching us on YouTube. Subscribe, like, rate us, review us, give us 5 stars. You only give us 4 stars. I'm inclined to believe you are a hater. We have got Steven Godfrey with us. And I have to say this because normally I have a way intro this on Wednesdays, a way intro this on Thursdays. And we thought originally this was going to go on Thursday, but then that boy Lane Kiffin popped up, got a little too hot for TV, and that stuff we were going to talk about, like, you know, the seemingly impending financial doom of college sports. We'll get to that, but first, Lane. All right, so and this happened. I'm not making this about me, but I did the thing on Trinidad Chambliss for Vanity Fair. I had no idea that at the same time there was a Lane Kiffin article in the hopper. Not that they owed me this information or anything like that, but I had absolutely no idea. And then I found out it was happening because Lane posted pictures online from the photo shoot. And I'm like, this will be interesting. And overall, I got to tell you, I read the article. I think Chris Smith was the author. I read the article. I thought the article was interesting, though interesting in the way that Lane Kiffin keeps getting people to believe that he ain't that bad a guy, right? Like, and not even that, because he might not be. I came away from reporting on the Chambliss story without talking to Lane, being like, oh, he's not as bad a guy as I thought he was. But he always makes people think he's just around the corner from some major breakthrough, right? He has always turned over some new leaf, even if the reason you're there is because you feel like you got fooled one more time. But he always gets people on it. But what has been fascinating to me about this one is the quote that got everybody riled up. Shout out to the Vanity Fair social producers doing what social producers do. Forget the whole fucking article. We're going to have Lane make the point that, you know, when I tell people to come to Baton Rouge, they respond differently than when I say come to Oxford, Mississippi. And long and the short, when I say Baton Rouge, I don't have to get somebody's grandmama and convince her that it's okay, like I did with Oxford, Mississippi. And then he went a little further and he said, when they come to Baton Rouge, they're like, oh, look at the diversity. It doesn't look like there's any segregation here, implying that that is not what they said about Oxford. And Steven Godfrey, Ole Miss grad, I am very curious what you thought.
Where do we start?
Yeah, I'm saying, what you thought about this. I want you to go first because I don't want to do anything to poison these waters at all.
All right. So here's the problem. We have to introduce 2 concepts that are simultaneously true but in conflict here. And media does not like that. We are not built for that. All right. So let's get the obvious out of the way here because I'll throw my credentials on the table. I am a product of said Aryan Nation Country Club Institute. All right. All right. I got also. We'll get to the Sark thing later on in the segment, but there have been some aspersions cast about the quality of an Ole Miss degree, to which I can only confirm it took me 6 years to get a 1.96 GPA. All right. Yes, every piece of the subject matter utilized by Lane Kiffin is obviously correct. It is obviously a completely real and concerning narrative, if you will. I'm going to use a lot of media buzzwords today. Lane Kiffin very tactically went directly at the weakest spot on Ole Miss's defense and Ole Miss's armor, because I'm going to have to jump around a little bit and talk about this kind of prolonged divorce with Lane Kiffin and why it's unique to anything else that's ever happened in college football. So let's acknowledge the obvious about Ole Miss if we need to, right? I think I did this a little bit last time I was on the show.
Yes.
There's nothing he said that's factually inaccurate except, here we go. You ready? He's also completely talking out of his ass. And I know almost for certain that he did not run into any concerns from a racial dynamic while recruiting for Ole Miss, especially and almost certainly in the last 3 seasons. That's because of the paradigm shift going from what we called recruiting, with my fingers decidedly making quotes, to actual player compensation. And we can get into that as well. So, yes, the state of Ole Miss's perception is a very real and sensitive issue. The people who are actually in charge of that brand know exactly what dog whistle they are blowing. Okay? There is absolutely a disingenuous misinformation campaign that works constantly in Mississippi to tell you it's not what you think it is. It's not the obvious. I'm so sick of the word gaslighting, and yet this might be the most apt description of how Ole Miss markets itself. Okay? Full stop. If you need any other evidence, just go and look at the kind of undergraduates they attract who are not athletes, who come from, let's say, maybe like a North Atlanta suburb, a Highland Park in Dallas, right? Young whites with a certain amount of money who didn't necessarily have the academics to get into a University of Georgia, a University of Texas, if you will. All right. So Ole Miss is what Ole Miss is, and we don't really need to pick that apart. However, Lane Kiffin, in a moment of, I think, a little bit of panic, flipped the only switch he had left to try and shift public sentiment. So let's move on a little bit for a second, Bo, and I want to talk about why all this came to be. Lane Kiffin, in his entire career, never expected to receive this amount of public backlash for making a obvious job move to many, right? Up until maybe 2 years ago, if anybody were to leave Ole Miss for LSU in terms of the football job, nobody would really think much of it, right? You start adding in the context of walking away from a playoff team that ended up going to the Final Four. All right. So that alone kind of carries some baggage with it. Then you start talking about, well, with the NIL apparatus, we're seeing an evening out of top institutions in a way that we've never seen before. So you could take a Texas, you could take a Notre Dame, then you could also take one of these upstart programs like an Indiana or an Ole Miss, and you have a tough time following your compass as to what is a value program, what is a top 10 job, what is a place where you can or cannot win a national title. All of this kind of bears down on Lane Kiffin this offseason cycle, on top of the fact that he is, in fact, Lane Kiffin, who welcomes and actively encourages attention to be placed upon him at all times. All right? By the way, some of my favorite parts of this, and we're going to have to jump around a little bit, are the, I don't know if this is going to shock anybody, but if you think you're going from a conservative bastion in Oxford to some sort of progressively liberal bastion in Baton Rouge, I've already said this twice today, but like one of my favorite, go look up Interstate 110. It runs through Baton Rouge. Okay.
Yes.
Go look up why Interstate 110 is shaped the way it is and the direction it follows. If you ever want a great story about race in America, especially the South, I learned this from Luther Campbell, of all people. It was actually because I was spending some time with him for a profile, but he wrote about this in his autobiography. Look at all the interstate construction in post-World War II America.
Oh, yeah. It's all through our shit.
And the way it is constructed, right? So the city I'm sitting in right now in Nashville, the structure of Interstate 440, it's the same thing that bisects the city, has a particular kind of wonk to it, for lack of a better term. That's because it split Jefferson Street dead down the middle, which if you're from like a place like Atlanta, that would be like if you dropped the interstate directly on Sweet Auburn. Okay.
Yeah. So kind of, sort of.
So Baton Rouge is shockingly enough, maybe not the progressive liberal enclave that Lane would have you believe. But my favorite part of this is remember, it was a aggressively MAGA, aggressively Republican governor that started the courtship of Lane Kiffin in the first place. So all of these GOP strategists, conservatives, and operatives and state reps now are defending a guy who is essentially using the one cudgel they hate the most, which is to talk about race relations, as a reason for coming to Louisiana. So it's great because they've got their hands wrapped around this double-edged sword and they can't let go. So
yeah, it was the fun part of Baton Rouge, though, for me, as it relates is, and I hadn't really thought about this till I scanned the whole map and tried to think of schools that can do this. It's really two. It's Florida State and LSU that have always had the ability to say in recruiting, but if you just go on the other side of town,
yeah,
there's this other school that you could really party at. Now, they like staying at LSU, don't get me wrong, right? But where Lane says, when I say Baton Rouge, it doesn't sound like Oxford, because I know personally when I hear Baton Rouge, I think about the other side of town, right?
Think about Southern.
I think about something completely different than LSU. And so if Lane had just said that, he'd have been okay. But Lane got it sounded like LSU looks like, honestly, like a school that doesn't exist.
Oh yeah, like it's in Baton Rouge, Vermont, or something. I mean, this is the kind of like this level of disingenuousness. I kind of respect it, but again, what I encourage people to do is not take any of this stuff at its face value or its merits. This guy is trying to play chess right now, and he's trying to come from behind because he is a very, very self-consumed individual, and his public image is so much more important to him than it is for any other coach I've ever encountered in 20, 25 years of sports media. This guy's weakness is also his strength, which is that he can at all times seem magnanimous. And when there are actual moments of football stress, he can sort of absorb that attention away from his players. He is a savant as an offensive play caller. He is an incredible developer of quarterback talent, but he's also his own worst enemy. I hate to operate in cliche. So until he gets actual tackle football to be consumed with for a little while, I would expect this cycle to persist. But I don't know if you saw this, Bo. He has issued an apology of sorts this afternoon to On3 Sports for specifically the, I guess, commenting on the obvious in Oxford or sort of stating the thing. The problem is he kind of got a little, well, there's no kind of, he got beat up yesterday because there's so many places I can go with this. Lane Kiffin does not have the cleanest closet, right? Lane Kiffin has realized in real time that the same people who helped enable and cover up his path, his journey, if you will, and I'll leave it at that, are the same people that he has just enraged in the one area, the one sensitivity,
the sore spot, the sore spot they have,
weakest spot that these people in Mississippi have. And so I think he's trying to backtrack a little bit lest we start to see some tabloid fodder spring up between now and September from some aggrieved parties in Mississippi, which at this point, on this day, as we record this on May 12th, I would be shocked if we don't have some sort of revelation surface up from one of Kiffin's previous transgressions, because he's pissed off all of his body movers. He's pissed off all the people who dug the shallow graves.
So, yes. So I have an observation, right? I love when I get to ask my white friends about these things. The phrase, the race card, is very interesting. White people do not like it when they feel like black people play, quote unquote, the race card. And the reason is they know that bitch don't never get declined, right? Right. Like white people are far more aware of the prevalence of racism than black people are. We're just over here guessing, right? Sometimes we get it wrong in ways that, like, we assume the racism isn't there. I mean, is there when it isn't, but there's also a lot of times where it's around and we have absolutely no idea. But within, especially amongst Southerners, the idea that the other people are racist gets people to jump up, right? Like the Mississippi people are making the argument, honestly, hey, we know how you guys get down also. Like, as the point that you made, you're not going to argue to anybody of the progressive nature of Baton Rouge, of LSU, of Jeff Landry, or anything else. You're not going to be able to do it. So those people really, really, really don't like it when you pop up and say that. I saw Tim Brando basically labeling that hate speech, and Tim Brando's living in Shreveport, Louisiana, where, by the way, my daddy has always said the meanest white people in the world exist. But what I'm saying is, this white man in Louisiana put on his cape to protect the virtue and honor of Ole Miss, because we just don't talk like that, right? Like he's operating under the premise that, hey, man, if we just crew up and decide that we're not going to do this to each other, we won't have no issues, right? But he feels like Lane violated what is like implicitly the code of what's going on. On the other hand, what Lane does have on his side with LSU, and I looked this up, they have a much higher black enrollment number than the majority of schools in the SEC. Now, Ole Miss's number, I think, is somewhere around 11%, which is double the number of many schools in the SEC. Right. The issue, of course, is that Ole Miss's black population is somewhere between 35 and 40, which is to say that the 11 feels very, very, very paltry under those circumstances, right? But where Lane bothered me with this is that you marched in 2020 with Mike Leach, rest in peace, where you guys bit your lips and marched to the State House to try to get the state flag changed to take the stars and bars off of it, because it was ultimately bad for business, right?
Right.
Anything that Lane is talking about right now about the racial state of affairs at Ole Miss, Lane could have done something about it. Because let me tell you, a progressive man who did speak on some of his problems with the way race was presented in Oxford, Tommy Tuberville. Okay? So it doesn't take the most courageous man in the world to actually do something about this in real time. Lane did not do that. Lane waited until he got to LSU to decide that he was going to say something about this. And everything he said about them holding on to Confederate imagery and Colonel Reb and all of this. And to be fair to Lane, Lane tried to hide it. Lane get that. It's the sip when Lane talks about it. It's Ole Miss when the white folks talk about it. When you're selling it to the players, it's one thing. When I went down there, I found it very interesting that to get to the football facility at Ole Miss, and I don't think this was necessarily done like this on purpose, but it works out nicely. If you come from Memphis, you come straight down that road and you make a right and go to the facility, and you ain't got to see nothing else. They get you right there in the offices. They know they got that problem, right?
Right.
But they also can't do but so much to change it because the other people like the other stuff too.
Yeah, it's about who's in charge. So
Yeah.
it really comes down to, when you're talking about Ole Miss, it's about who's in charge. Do you want to, if you want to give total fealty to a guy like Kiffin, and had he stayed, I'll play out a hypothetical with you real fast. Let's say he stays. Let's say they just go to the same scenario. They go to the Final Four. They lose to Mario Cristobal in Miami. But everything that's happened this offseason, Chambliss comes back, Kejuan Lacey comes back, but now you got Lane Kiffin coming back as well. Lane Kiffin has now rebuked LSU. He turned down Auburn, by the way. So if it was a racist hotbed, I guess he could have gone to Auburn to the warm, progressive hands of Southeast Alabama. He could have gone to Auburn 3 years ago now. But let's say he stays. It is possible in time he would actually be the first person in the history of that university to build enough equity to make more changes. I'm not going to say all the changes. I'm not going to say one particular change because you can kind of pick from a variety of things. I think he could have pushed an agenda along that would have found an audience amongst those who would actually maybe push the right button or maybe take their hand off of it, if you will. So I think it's possible he could have been the one. He never had any interest in that whatsoever. Like, I want to be clear about this. He has co-opted the concept of modern race relations specifically to help his own PR campaign in the offseason because people looked at Ole Miss in a way that Lane did not from a football standpoint. Yeah. Again, I got to be careful here on how I talk about the institution and what happened on that football team the last 2 years. They overachieved, and we don't really know this yet, they're setting a new standard and a new blueprint because they have been very intuitive and very intelligent in how they structure their NIL. One of the things that I cannot criticize about my alma mater is the way they have gone about building roster payments, the way they have gone about managing the payroll, the way they have evaluated and paid talent. I really think it's second only to the very, very top tier of the sport. And it is the reason why they are now considered to be, I mean, they're at least playoff contenders going back into this season without their head coach. Even with Pete Golding, kind of just a glorified, Saban defensive assistant at the helm. They don't have their savant play caller anymore. So let's back up a little bit. You talk about playing the race card. I find it interesting that Lane Kiffin, outsider, non-Southerner, established name before he gets to the SEC, right? Like everyone in America knew, like he was coach of the Raiders, which feels like 30 years ago, right? If he was following the kind of normal script of the outsider who comes to the South, this would have been front of mind his first year in Knoxville.
Yes.
Right? I would say maybe the first year he gets to Knoxville to at least acknowledge what's going on in terms of race relations. Certainly, Bo, from recruiting the South. It's not about the cities it's not about Knoxville or Oxford or Baton Rouge or these cities. It's about where you go, right?
Right.
Because at a certain point in all those places, you know where you got to go? You got to go to Memphis.
Yeah.
Okay? You got to go to Atlanta. You got to go to the cities where you got to go to Birmingham, where these things actually happened in history. So I find it interesting that Lane Kiffin has any kind of epiphany in terms of race relations or anything like that so late in his existence. All right?
Yeah.
That, the race card part of this is it's fascinating. One thing I have to since we're in the coach's film room of white folks right now, okay? So welcome in, especially Southern whites. It starts with an unwillingness to self-examine because I am of a believer that if you are white and Southern and you are over the age of 15 to 20, no one's hands are totally clean by today's standards. And I think that's actually a sign of progress as we go. So in other words, if I were to repeat that statement 20 years from now amongst Southern whites, I would want that to still be true because what it means is we're advancing the standard, right? What it means is that your existence at 15 or 18 years old would not be suitable. Some of the things you may have heard and not done anything about, some of the things that you thought were socially acceptable, et cetera, et cetera. So it starts from a place of unease because nobody really wants to self-examine. Then you get into that outsider thing with Kiffin not being of Mississippi or being of the South. Then you get into, he abandoned us after talking so wonderfully about the healing powers of Mississippi specifically, about Oxford specifically, about these this culture that took care of him when his father died and all the things they saw him through and the hot yoga and all this kind of nonsense. So it's a betrayal on multiple levels. But then at the end of the day, you're also left with a bunch of people who are Southern and white who have been called this by an outsider. And that is where it becomes the bridge too far. This is not one of your own.
Yeah. But I will say this in fairness to Lane on that, because I know the perception is outsider. David Cutcliffe is from Birmingham, and he made his bones at Tennessee. And I would argue it's a different Oxford, Mississippi that he went to in 2000 or 2001 than the one that Lane Kiffin went to. But he got there also and was like, whoo, buddy.
Yeah, so Cut got hired my freshman year. So I did not know I was going to Ole Miss, and I don't think Cutcliffe knew he was going to Ole Miss until about the same time. He went from calling plays for a national title team, calling the offensive plays for Peyton Manning, to bam. You wanted a head coaching job? Well, you got one, right?
Right.
I kind of honestly, that's how I felt when I hit the campus as well. Yes, it's different. But also you have to, let's go back to your buddy Tommy for a second. We're actually hitting the 30-year anniversary of what is sort of known in the state as the stick ban.
Yes.
So that was Tommy Tuberville's prescient, I guess, move to not ban the waving of the Confederate flag, not to impede on anyone's First Amendment rights, Bo, but to simply take away the device from which a flag can be effectively displayed. And if you think about it, that is some 4D chess.
It really was.
Hey,
that was brilliant.
You ever try and wave? I don't have anything on my desk. You ever try and wave anything that's limp without something that's firm? Like, I mean, it's kind of genius. So, you know, it's ironic, to say the least, to see Tommy Tuberville's political career progress. But even then, and I think this is why people are so upset today, is because Ole Miss has never been higher. Their Q rating has never been higher in terms of their football value. And then you go back to this thing it's the target they refuse to remove from their back, but it's also their weakest point. So you go back to something that's been essentially hounding them throughout the modern era of football at their highest point. And this is why they're so upset. And also, I got a lot of texts. I got a lot of phone calls yesterday. This was not the issue for Lane Kiffin. The issue was money. We can actually compare these two jobs if you want to. I mean, I think the perception here is more interesting than what he's actually alleging. I think he's grasping at straws because he's trying to make himself kind of move into a savior complex role. But you know, the real issue here is the actual money. And the kids that ended up at Ole Miss the last 2 or 3 years were from a larger national footprint than they ever have been, and I would say better compensated than a lot of teams in the SEC. Some that might surprise you.
Yeah, I will make this point. And when I did the story on Chambliss, I asked every single member of the Chambliss family if they had any concern about sending their son to play at the University of Mississippi, specifically with the Mississippi part.
Okay.
It was a no all the way across the board, right? I don't know if I want to extrapolate fully from that, but I think that for a lot of the people surrounding Ole Miss, they thought they'd finally beat the rap, right? That we are so far removed from the images of the flags on sticks and everything else that if you're of a certain age, you don't necessarily know why Ole Miss as a name lands with me. The way, like, why would I think of the University of Mississippi differently than I think of Mississippi State necessarily without the flags waving and everything else? I think they thought that they had beat the rap. And then Lane, I think they need to listen to Lane on this and be like, oh, wait a minute. So this was still coming up, except nobody trusts Lane when he talks. And that I think is the part that sets them up. But I do want to break here and then come back because I do want to talk to you about comparing the jobs, because when Lane left, I had some questions about how much better the job was that he was going to. We'll talk about that coming up next. You can predict the playoff action all the way to the finals with FanDuel Predicts. All you have to do is sign up to get your $25 bonus. Follow all the playoff dishes, swishes, wishes, and misses. Every move is a potential plot twist. Predict the spread, the total points, and even the game-winning moments that make the playoffs. Where one run, one rebound, one shot changes everything. From opening tip to the final buzzer, stay locked in with every pass, every play, and every moment that moves us closer to crowning a champion. Sign up now for your $25 bonus on FanDuel Predicts. Offered by FanDuel Prediction Markets, LLC, a registered futures commission merchant. 18 plus. Bonus is non-withdrawable and expires 7 days after receipt. Trading derivatives involves significant risk and may not be suitable for all investors. Manage your activity with our consumer protection tools. Restrictions apply. See terms at fanduel.com/predicts/bonus-offer-terms. All right, we are back here with Steven Godfrey and Lane making it is really funny listening to LSU versus Ole Miss on who the real racist is, right? It's the Spider-Man meme, right? Everybody's sitting here pointing at each other in this way. And by the way, the argument that LSU has on its side in recruiting is actually born of racism, which is the big school full of black people on the other side of 110, right? Like it's all weirdo Southern back and forth stuff as it goes. But Ole Miss, I think, they got to look at it this way too, that in the pay-for-play era, this helps them overcome the past more than anything ever did, because now we're just talking about cold, hard cash.
That's
right?
all it is, yeah.
Yeah, because in application, you're probably going to a school that's going to feel racist at points, no matter where you go, any of these schools, let alone the SEC, right?
Sure.
But just about any of them. But LSU's advantage had always been a school with a whole bunch of football players who all go to LSU when the time has come, right? If they don't go to LSU, it's typically because LSU did not want them. But the University of Mississippi have been better than them, clearly, for the last couple of years. And it raised the question, how much better in this day and age is the LSU job really? I don't have the answer. I still think the LSU job is better, but how much better, I think you've got more insight in, if it's better at all to you.
Yeah, and I'm going to start my response by agreeing. I don't know exactly, and I think it would be ridiculously disingenuous for anybody to try and grade some of these jobs right now.
Yeah.
The reality is that we are taking 80 years of history of one sport, and then we're cramming 3 years of context to a new landscape and trying to make these things work together. They're not going to. Usually, if you have a larger state population, you have a larger state university with more enrollment, admission standards are fair. And what I mean that from a football player sense. I'm not like going to dress that up. It's easier to get into LSU than it is to get into Texas or Virginia or North Carolina, right? So if you have those headwinds, you have a state full of football fans and a traditional football footprint, then if the numbers are higher in column A than they are in column B, then you go with column A. But what has upended the sport is the success of Indiana, the ascension of a program like Ole Miss, the concept. Even 2 years ago, look at a program. Look at Illinois. Look at South Carolina. Right? We're seeing this.
Even Miami's return.
Miami should not have ever returned by the standards of the Saban era of college football. Right? They had nothing to offer that the champions of those eras could. And what you're seeing at Alabama right now is, I think, I'm not joking, Bo, like they're bordering on existential crisis because none of the parameters that built the Saban standard are even applicable to the modern game. I said this morning on my Yahoo show, and like my Andy Staples, my co-host, he was like, "Oh God, I don't know if Saban's like a 10-game winner if he's coaching right now, because none of what they did and the way they built their depth and the style of football they played by hoarding talent, it's closer to the 1960s than it is to 2023." Okay, so to answer your question, for the history of the sport since the SEC was fully desegregated, the answer should be LSU. And I think right now, gun to my head, May of 2026, the answer is still LSU. But I do think the margin has decreased, and it's decreased noticeably at some of these schools. That I think is the answer. Now, how this plays out and what the ROI is on Lane is going to be hard to measure because they're paying him a king's ransom in salary. But it's really just going to come down to how well can they fund and manage that NIL apparatus. And I want to be clear, one more thing. It's not just about the money y'all throw in. It's not about, hey, we got 80 million and this team's got 40 million, because I keep saying this and people don't believe me. Indiana that's not the biggest payroll in college football. It wasn't close. Okay? They are paying their kids well and they are doing a good job of it. But I am telling you for a fact, you can't look, if you could throw money at a problem and win in college football, we'd be talking about Texas A&M's 15th national title. And they ain't got none. All right.
Yeah. Like to me, in the old paradigm, LSU should have been the best job in America.
Yes.
right?
Top five, yeah.
Yeah, well, I used to say Texas was the best job, but the part that I misunderstood about Texas for all those years was Texas is only close to Texas. Like, it's really difficult to go get somebody, even from, call it Baton Rouge or whatever, to go to Austin. That's a really long drive, right? Like, the nature of it, and there are all these other schools in the area or whatever. You got to fight with OU in the north of all of these things. LSU has a great, and I think Georgia was also on this list, right? Like, Georgia and LSU, I think, are right next to each other because they have proximity to talent, not just in their own state, but also regionally, and then a big enough name that when you really needed to, you could go out nationally and you could get somebody in. And for LSU and Georgia, for the longest time, you could just say anybody from our state we want. Ohio State was in a very similar situation. If they're around here, we can go ahead and we can get them. But now that money is involved, and like you said, the big thing is it's the second level of the depth chart that doesn't look like it used to for the powers.
It's not
right?
possible. Yeah,
You can't do that sort of stuff anymore. So now that you can't do that, and it then becomes about the money, what also becomes really important to me is how good a coach your coach actually is. So like in basketball, where you could just roll the ball out there and make it happen.
Yeah.
Running counter to what I'm saying is that Mario Cristobal got to a national championship game. So maybe you can roll the ball out here and make it happen. But the value of the coach, to me, should actually get a little bit higher, though less as the acquirer of talent than the person who actually maximizes.
The problem compounding all of this is that we are trying to logically pick apart a value set. What we're trying to do is ascribe value to the different categories. Coaching, university capacity, NIL, roster construction, and players. College football has a disease, especially in the South, and that is that they are addicted to statues. They want to take coaches and they want to burnish their myth into something that's bigger than life. How this is borne out should go without explanation, but just in case you're new here, there is the statue building culture it's based on building icons out of the white man in charge. It always has been. It's you could say it's less or more about race depending on how you want to frame it. That's fine, but look, there's no statues of players in Tuscaloosa. None. Think about all the players off the top of your head that are in the NFL right now. Just the last 10 years.
And it's funny because by comparison, they got a statue of all three Selman brothers at Oklahoma.
Afflicted as an Atlanta fan I am, Quintorris Lopez-Jones is, to me, the greatest physical wide receiver I've ever seen in my life. No statue in Tuscaloosa. None.
Yeah.
But his coach has a statue.
Yeah.
And the coach before him has a statue. So I'm not picking here. I'm trying to explain that there's going to be a serious and brutal detox amongst those who write checks that make things happen to understand that dumping money at the feet of one man who never tackles, who never throws the ball to fix the problem and become the standard is no longer applicable. It will not yield you success. I need everyone listening or watching to understand there is a reason Nick Saban stepped down as quickly and as vehemently as he did. He knew immediately that the jig was up. Immediately, okay? The first second after they lost to Michigan in the Rose Bowl, and some of his players matriculated in and so wanted to start talking about their deals, okay? Scooby-Doo villain time. That mask came off. I gotta go, right? I'm out. Because I can't bully. I can't stockpile, all right? And I can't suck out the resources from the surrounding areas. You know, what made Alabama a behemoth under Nick Saban was the city of Atlanta and the state of Florida. But you can't do that anymore because you can't have, Bo, I'm not kidding. Alabama towards the end didn't cheat. I'm kind of like the expert at this, like throughout my career on Bagman. They really didn't cheat that much towards the end of the Saban era. You know why?
They have to.
They would do this. They would walk in with a piece of paper and they would lay it down on the table. What position do you play? Right guard? Okay. What position do you play? Outside linebacker? What are you, a nickel? Great. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 guys who have played that position are in the league right now. Of those 6 guys, maybe 3 are on their second contract. There was no other, there was nothing else that could supersede that. I don't care if Ole Miss or Auburn or somebody else had a bag of cash in a parking lot. That was the clearest path to becoming a millionaire, to becoming a person who could actually receive and distribute life-changing wealth to their family. And now you can receive life-changing wealth for your family your junior year. Dante Moore stayed at Oregon instead of going to the Jets. Full stop.
Right. Trinidad Chambliss went back to Ole Miss.
Yeah, because it's a much better financial move. So now we go back to talking about Ole Miss. We talk about LSU. I don't care where the school is. If you organize the money well, hey, man, there ain't no D tackles in Oregon.
Right.
Bro, there ain't nobody fucking. I'm sorry. There's just like high school football in Eugene. Are you kidding me?
That year they played against Auburn in the national championship game. One of their starting defensive tackles was 255 pounds.
Yeah. And now they're cherry picking the same guys that Georgia is. Dan Lanning is not doing anything that Kirby Smart is not. So now it's about an arms race and who can best utilize the infrastructure. But when I say these things, the default setting for college football fans, especially in the South and Midwest, who are predominantly still white, middle or upper class, is to default to the idea of we need the right coach. We need the right coach. But what if you don't? I'm serious. What if you don't? I'm not NBA versed. I never covered the NBA in my career. But I know this, when you're building a championship, dude, so I'm a Hawks fan. How much am I putting on Quinn Snyder to make this run right now, right? How much am I putting on Quinn Snyder? How much am I putting on Jalen on the floor, right? If that mentality were to bleed over into this sport, I think the culture of college football would change tremendously in a way that a lot of people don't want to for, reasons.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because Cignetti just got a gazillion dollars that seems to be very well earned because the idea of Indiana as national champion, and it's a bunch of his guys, right? And, it was, and like you said, I'm sure that Michigan was spending more money on players than Indiana was. Yet Indiana had what was clearly the best team in the Big Ten.
Yes.
So I'm still at this point inclined to believe that it matters somewhat. The guy obviously that needs to be shaking in his fucking boots is Ryan Day. Because now it is officially like, dude, we literally can get anybody to do this now. Anybody in the world.
I would say him. I would say Cristobal, and then contextually, I would say because of what's going on in Austin, I would say Sark is in a very interesting situation.
Yes. Oh, he better. This is the year,
buddy.
Right?
If it ain't, your ass is out. In fact, I'll go one further, and I guess this would be newsmaking of some degree, having covered the sport for a long time. Will Muschamp coming over is very interesting to me. Will Muschamp had a catbird ideal retirement gig, right? So he's got one son playing for Vanderbilt. He's with his buddy Kirby. He works whenever he wants to. He's in an ideal situation at his alma mater. There's no pressure on him whatsoever at Georgia. And he is going over to Texas this year, I think, because there's enough palace intrigue to where this is kind of a thing that smart ADs do. If they can smell even the slightest bit of blood going into a season with expectations, they need to know where that interim is going to be. There is a ton of pressure on Steve Sarkisian right now. Massive amount. At least Ryan Day has the hardware.
Yeah.
That might buy him, if you're comparing the two, that might buy him a little bit more time.
Yeah.
And
because the Ohio State is interesting because the fans firmly believe that it is the machine that does this, but not the coach, which is a fair point. I will just simply note that every coach that has ever done it at Ohio State is in the Hall of Fame. And the guys that have not done it are not. Earl Bruce, not in the Hall of Fame. John Cooper, not going to anybody's Hall of Fame. All the other guys, to make it work, it does seem to be a Hall of Fame job that we all think that we could make the Hall of Fame if we manage to get it.
Sure.
Texas is an interesting job because one guy has maxed it out ever, and Mac did not max it out. Mac got to the mountaintop that one time, but Mac did not max this job out.
No.
And Royal, I would argue, I think they won those championships in like 61 and 63, but the big thing was, and it's impossible to explain this to people, they broke out the wishbone for the first time in the middle of a season, and they won 30 games in a row. It was like the first iPhone. Nobody had ever seen it before.
It's like, if the air raid had been dropped in like between play sets. Like,
yes.
Like
and given to a legitimate power.
Yes.
When they did it.
Yeah.
But nobody has maxed it out since, and everybody has been like, there's really no excuse for this thing not being maxed out. Now, the excuse that they had for much of the time, very similar to the Ole Miss excuse. You said a tweet about this once. Ole Miss looks at Alabama and is like, how come we're not as good as you? The same way Texas looks at Oklahoma and says, how come we're not as good as you? And the answer is your own racism. It's done you in for a very, very, very long time. In fact, in 2020, when the world was trying to change everything, Texas is like, them boys going to put their toes on the line and sing our racism carol. That's what they're going to do. Yes, they are.
So let's back up for a second. Let's talk about LSU and Ole Miss for a second. Why is LSU? Why do we have all of those numbers in column A that says LSU is a better job? It's because of state population. It's because of the state economy. It's because the amount of disposable income available for a particular NIL donor. Like all of these numbers add up for a reason. So now let's talk about the state of Alabama and the state of Georgia and the state of Mississippi. They all sit next to each other, right? Okay. One of those states had a capital city that aggressively, and I'm not saying perfectly, but I'm saying aggressively endeavored to better their racial dynamic, to welcome not only, and this wasn't, by the way, none of this is altruism. I want to be really clear here. I'm not sitting here talking as a cookie cutter white liberal. This is about making money. Yes. But this is ultimately what we're talking about as well. And when it comes to football, it's about money. So the state of Georgia and the city of Atlanta 30, 40, 50 years ago said, you know what? You know what's more profitable than holding on to the old ways and fighting the good fight against the minorities? Making some money, right? So the city and state government, for a time with Atlanta and Georgia, locked arms and said, hey, every European business, you know what we are? Air travel's the future. We're going to be the way station for the world. We're going to bring in all these German and Dutch and English businesses. We already have every interstate in America and every train yard that comes through here. Guess what that trickles down to, Bo? In 2026, the University of Georgia is damn near a professional football team for that reason, because they have the city of Atlanta, that population, and specifically that urban population, as we say in white circles, in case we're worried about someone maybe overhearing it. It's an urban population that creates football players, okay? So why does Mississippi not have any of that? Because they didn't do any of that 40, 50, 60 years ago. So if you just look at Ole Miss and LSU, Louisiana is not a racially harmonious institution by any stretch, right? New Orleans has its problems. Baton Rouge has its problems. But Mississippi stands alone as the forefront example of staring at progress with all its potential financially. I'm not talking about anything other than financial for a second, okay? I'm not doing that Pollyanna shit. And saying, guess what? And then they pull out a gun and shoot themselves in the foot twice over. Yeah. Twice over. So to go all the way back around, Kiffin ultimately made a financial decision. LSU's paying him more. They're promising more in NIL. The reason they're doing that is because there are fewer people and fewer millionaires in Mississippi. And then when we ask ourselves why, we got to start talking about things that we don't like to talk about.
Yeah, and Mississippi used to have the most millionaires per capita in America, but that was back when the industry was configured a little differently. You make a great point about Atlanta, because it's something that I hadn't really thought about until this moment as you said it. But just about every city in that main drag of the South has tried to, every state in that main drag of the South has tried to choke out its major city. Louisiana has historically tried to choke out New Orleans. Tennessee has done it with Memphis. Alabama has done that with Birmingham. It is criminal what Mississippi does with Jackson. Atlanta is the only one where the state did not decide to kill it. There are some very interesting trades in order to make it work that way, yes, but they did not decide to kill it. And look at what the results were.
Yeah, and when you have some billionaire business come from out of town, they have to have a city for the infrastructure. This is like, I feel like we're now in a sociology class, but all of this factor, the reason I work in football, the reason why I work in college football specifically, is I can tell you any story in the world with college football. You may not want to hear it, and I may have to dress it a lot more football for you to get the medicine down, but we can sit here and talk about the economic destruction of the South, the advancement of a place like Atlanta. It all factors into football. That's why the SEC championship's in one city and it's not in another. Birmingham's a great example. If anything, Alabama's football success stands in contrast to the economic, social, and racial development of the state of Alabama. It almost is impossible at times to rectify.
Yeah. I'll ask you this before we get out of here. Do you have any plans to be in Oxford? I believe it is the third weekend in September when Lane is going to make his return, because I'm kind of tempted. I kind of always want to see what it's going to be all, man, because they are hot down. They are salty down there. Even Trinidad Chambliss, who is not salty, I asked him in the game, he knew the date and he sucked his lip when he said it. He was ready to rock for that one.
No, I got a 4K television. Look, I am an Ole Miss expat. I have logged my time and I want nothing to do with that. I'm married into an LSU family. I'm more than aware of the circumstances and all that. I'm sure I'll be writing and podcasting off of it. But as of this moment, no one has put an amount of money in front of me that's going to make me go deal with that nonsense.
I'll tell you this about LSU. You mentioned this in marrying into the family, and I do think they do a good job of this in their public presentation. they have married in like just enough elements of kind of HBCU football culture all the way down to playing, talking out the side of your neck and everything else. And you get the white lady at the White House dancing to get the gat and all of that stuff. And that combined with the South Louisiana accent, they do project the image of being cooler whites than the others.
Well,
like in a very particular way.
It's not white. I mean, I'm gonna be very careful how I say this because I married a white woman from Louisiana who has Cajun heritage. It's not Southern white. It's not. Yes. It's not WASP. I'm just telling you. So like I was born a WASP, a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant from the South. It is not. And amongst whites, they will talk about this. Like it is something else, slightly off. Now, when it comes time, of course, in a moment of reckoning, you know how that designation is going to fall. I'm not trying to push that, but it is not the planter class of Mississippi or the cracker, the sort of cracker genetics of where I'm from in Georgia. It is not the same kind of white person. Just like I would maybe advance that further on the other side of the spectrum. If you go to East Tennessee or you go to Kentucky, that also is a completely different culture. By the way, as far as I'm concerned, if I'm on the committee, still scariest white folks in the world.
Oh, okay. Buddy, I've made that Eastern Tennessee drive, that I-64 across. That is Southern Indiana and Eastern Kentucky are the only two places where I was like, I need to hurry up and get back in the car.
Yeah, and if by the way, if anybody thinks all this is some sort of racial reckoning for the SEC, Indiana just won the national title. I don't know how much time people have spent in Indiana, but like, let's not kid ourselves, okay?
No, that's where, and this is a long discussion for another day, but I understand the arguments that people make about, well, what if these boys from the South stop going to SEC schools in protest of the redistricting things that we've seen? And it's like, you mean, and go to these other places that would do the exact same thing if they had those dynamics? I mean, I get your point. I'm just telling you, you're going to another. The only reason Colorado is not Mississippi is Colorado is not 37% black. If it was, Colorado would be Mississippi. That's just letting you guys know.
And that's the weird dynamic that happens in white circles where you get talked down to by white liberals from like Connecticut, suburbs. And you kind of have to walk a line if you're on my side of the fence as a white, where you're like, hey, look, I appreciate what you're saying. You also have absolutely no context for what it's like to grow up in a multiracial environment because everything was brought to you as a documentary or a textbook. The actual dynamic is very, very different. Very different. It reminds me of, I think it was you that I had this conversation with when Jamel Hill was advocating for the boycott of these programs and that for all these NFL player or future NFL talent to go to the HBCUs. Again, the only template I can use here, the only thing I can reduce this to, the only metric that matters, because it's the only thing that will actually affect change, is money. And I'm not saying that because I don't have a soul. I'm saying that because I know I am incredibly critical of the ruling class and I know what's going to happen. I don't understand that boycott, and somebody on social media keeps hitting me up about it. I know what you're talking about. Is the same as her proposition that everyone should go, like all of a sudden these 5-star wide receivers should start playing for Grambling or Valley. Why are we making this labor class take the hit?
Yes.
Like financially, why is a 5-star receiver denying himself the ability to, iron sharpens iron, et cetera, play in the Big Two conferences and then get it, go to the NFL? Why should he assume that financial burden? And so it's the same thing right now. To take it all the way home for Ole Miss, if you're a black player right now and you're considering Ole Miss versus X other SEC school, make sure the money's right. That's it. And then make sure your NFL path is straight.
Yeah. The point I made about the HBCU thing was my favorite college football example to tell you everything you need to know about how shit works. When the state of Alabama or the University of Alabama system would not allow Jimbo Fisher to take that job at UAB in 2007. Some think it's because they wanted him to be Saban's offensive coordinator. Some think it's because that search at the time was going so poorly that they were afraid that UAB would have a better coach than Alabama, and they could not. That was before Saban was a Hail Mary hire. People don't remember that. It wasn't supposed to go that way. Rich Rodriguez was supposed to be the guy to take that job. But anyway, I say all that to say, if the state stepped up to stop UAB from getting Jimbo Fisher, I don't know what you think they were going to do to stop Alabama State.
Bo, I bet your producer's laughing right now because right before we started, I told him that is the perfect segue for me to come back on the show in about 2 months because I may or may not have a mini series cooking on that exact story. So that was perfect. I appreciate the serendipity there, but yes, I'll be back very soon to talk a lot about UAB.
Hey, that is Steven Godfrey. I didn't rattle off all the places you could find him at the start. You can find him at Yahoo. Which podcast are you doing now? Because I know you got like 3 of them.
Yes. Yahoo College Football Inquirer, where I appear weekly. Phantom Island, myself and Ryan Naney, phantomisland.show. And I got a bunch of miniseries coming out this summer. I will be back to bug you guys to go listen to them, but I appreciate the time, Bo.
Hey, man, appreciate you. And ladies and gentlemen, thanks so much for joining us here on The Right Time. We do this 4 days a week. Ryan Brumley handling everything behind the scenes. Thank you, sir. BomaniJonesLive.com. Check us out. Live show May 15th in Atlanta. Hit the voicemail line, 323-596-7767. Remember, follow The Right Time. Subscribe, like, rate us, review us, give us 5 stars. You only give us 4 stars. I'm inclined to believe you are a hater. We'll talk to you guys in a couple of days. Take it easy.